This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The 2024 film It Ends With Us was a huge box office success, raking in over 10 times its budget. But ever since the press tour, a behind-the-scenes drama has been bubbling away between producer and star Blake Lively and director and co-star Justin Baldoni. It's exploded in recent weeks, with the two launching lawsuits against each other over claims of abuse, smear campaigns and reputational damage. With the legal battle between them now involving Blake Lively's husband, Ryan Reynolds, the Disney Corporation and Taylor Swift, we thought a shortcut was in order to explain how this little movie became such a big Hollywood story. Squiz Shortcuts is the backstory to the big news stories. I'm Alice Dempster.
And I'm Andrew Williams.
Andrew, for those who are unfamiliar, It Ends With Us was originally a novel by the US author Colleen Hoover that was published in 2016. It tells the story of Lily Bloom, a florist who enters into a relationship with a neurosurgeon named Ryle, and that relationship turns abusive over the course of the book.
Yeah, it's technically classed as a romance novel. There's a third character called Atlas who Lily has a long history with as well, and there's sort of a love triangle of sorts there, but it does, as you say, cover some heavy topics, which we will be discussing over the course of this episode, so fair warning. As a book, it was a decent success. It sold 1 million copies, and in 2019, the actor and producer Justin Baldoni, who you might know from his role on the TV series Jane the Virgin, but I wouldn't say he's a household name, bought the movie rights. And a couple of years later, the book's popularity exploded thanks to TikTok, and it sold millions more copies. And shortly after that, the movie adaptation got going in earnest.
Yeah, particularly when Blake Lively was cast in the role of Lily and also came on board as a producer. Baldoni ended up playing the role of Ryle, as I said, and he also directed the movie. And as we say, the film was a commercial hit, but its financial success was soon overshadowed by this emerging story of conflict between the two main stars.
And the first time I became personally aware of this conflict when I first started seeing stories about it was immediately after going to see the movie. I have seen the movie, and when I was looking up the stars and the director, as I do after I see just about any film, I started seeing these stories about these rumours that had been popping up during the press tour. And basically what had happened is that social media users had noticed that Baldoni and Lively never appeared at press events together, and none of the cast members of the film followed Baldoni on Instagram. So The Hollywood Reporter made some inquiries, which led to a story that the two had battled over creative control of the movie. But there are plenty of examples in Hollywood of conflict over creative control in movies. That in itself is not hugely unusual.
No, it's not. And it wouldn't typically get as many headlines as this situation did. But then there was another story bubbling along at the same time. Lively was copying a lot of heat on social media for what was seen to be insensitive or inappropriate behaviour while promoting the movie.
Critics were pointing to her promotion of her other business interests, like hair care products and an alcohol brand that she's involved with, as being insensitive to do so while promoting the movie, considering the heavy topics that are involved in the story. In addition to that, some old videos of her saying things that were considered inappropriate or rude started to resurface online as well. And at the time, Baldoni, who was very public about his feminist allyship and ideals and his care for telling this story due to his own personal experiences, had a general public image as being someone who had been on the losing end of a battle over creative control with a much bigger star in Lively.
And that speculation really continued to simmer along, and it seemed to be predominantly about two creative people butting heads on a movie set. That was until December, when it became a much, much bigger story. We'll talk about that next. Andrew, just before Christmas, the New York Times published an article called "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Campaign." That brought this story to an entirely new level.
That article's about 4,000 words, so we won't cover all of it, but I'll give you the gist. It alleges that Baldoni, his lead producer Jamie Heath, and his production company ran a smear campaign against Lively, including playing a role in boosting the unflattering videos and stories about her that were coming out on social media at the time that the movie was being released. The article alleges that the reason they did this is because Lively had made accusations during production of inappropriate conduct, both physical and verbal, and they were looking to discredit her reputation in case she tried to make those accusations public. And one of the ways they were said to have done that is this process called astroturfing, which is making a negative campaign against someone look as if it has sprung up organically on social media when it is actually very orchestrated. So like AstroTurf, which is fake grass that people use as a substitute for real grass on their lawns.
Yeah, the other thing to note, most of the article was based on a legal complaint that Lively made around the same time, which featured thousands of text messages and emails. The central complaint there was that several people involved, including Baldoni's crisis PR company, had run a smear campaign against her. She filed a lawsuit shortly afterwards.
Baldoni denied all of those allegations. He then filed his own lawsuit, not against Lively, but against the New York Times for libel, so essentially defaming him in print. He said the text messages and other communications that were quoted in the article misrepresented what were going on and were cherry-picked, essentially.
Yeah, around the same time, his legal team said that they'd also be filing a lawsuit against Lively herself, and that happened this week. And this is where the legal action really ramped up, Andrew. This new lawsuit for defamation, extortion, and invasion of privacy has drawn Disney, Ryan Reynolds, and Taylor Swift, one of Lively's best friends, into the discussion.
So we'll start with how Ryan Reynolds has been brought into this. There's an issue of him getting involved in rewrites and creative decisions on the movie that's part of it. But Baldoni also has issues with a character in an entirely different movie that came out last year, which was a movie called Deadpool versus Wolverine, which starred Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman as the Marvel characters. There's a character in that called Nicepool, and he's sort of an inversion of the Deadpool character, who is famously foul-mouthed and mean-spirited and very, very violent. He's the opposite of that. He's very nice. At one point, he touts his feminist ideals. He has a man bun, and he's very much a figure of fun and ridicule in the film. And Baldoni thinks this character is based on him. So what he wants to do is subpoena documents and communications from the making of the film, which is produced by Disney. That's where they come into this whole situation, to prove that that's the case and that the character of Nicepool is actually a satire of Baldoni himself.
Yeah, so that's how Disney and Ryan Reynolds are involved. And I know there are lots of people who are wondering how Taylor Swift fits into all of this.
Yeah, so the first thing to know, in case you don't, is that Blake Lively and Taylor Swift are longtime friends. And her involvement in this legal case is tangential, but it comes from a text message from Lively that Baldoni has included in his lawsuit. So there's a rooftop scene that takes place early in the scene. That's where the characters of Lily and Ryle, who are played by Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, that's where they meet for the first time. And Baldoni's lawsuit says that he and Lively were discussing the scene. Lively had rewritten a version of that scene, and she held a meeting about it, at which point she surprised him by inviting both Ryan Reynolds and a mega celebrity friend, which reports say is Taylor Swift, to support her and, according to his claims, essentially pressure him into including her version of the scene in the final cut of the movie.
And of course, Taylor Swift gets a lot of headlines, and her being associated with the lawsuit took it to a new level. And that brings us up to the current state of play. There's plenty going on, and the various lawsuits are likely to drag on throughout the year, so there'll be lots more headlines to come. But for now, that's our shortcut to Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni's legal battle. Now on to our recommendations. Andrew, what have you got for us?
So if you've got a New York Times subscription, I'd recommend that article we referenced called We Can Bury Anyone. That really kicked the whole story into a much higher gear. But if you don't have a subscription, there's a piece in The Guardian that looks into the PR element of it all and how the battle is playing out there. It's really interesting, and it also gets into the likelihood of any of these lawsuits actually succeeding or whether they will end up being settled instead. We'll include a link to both of those in the show notes.
And remember, we do love to hear your ideas for future shortcuts. You can send them through to hello@thesquiz.com.au. Until next time.